All right, so my essay is entitled The Conceptual Turn. When I began writing this essay, I had trouble separating the idea of teaching as a conceptual practice from the teaching of art, so I stopped trying, particularly as my own identity has become so immersed in the arts. I offer this as a subject position from which I considered this question. First, what do we mean by conceptual art? I can still recall instances in which I heard people in museums and galleries refer to an artwork as conceptual merely as a phrase for work that out of the ordinary or otherwise not discernible from a more formal perspective. It seemed to be an excuse for not being willing or able to engage with the work. The Tate Museum defines conceptual art as art for which the idea or the concept behind the work is more important than the finished project, referencing artists such as Joseph Kosuth, Terry Atkinson, John Baldessari, and Saul LeWitt. In an article written by LeWitt, he described the idea or the concept as the most important aspect of the work, and the actual execution as the perfunctory affair. LeWitt professed that ideas alone can be works of art. Several of his works were never given physical form. For example, a wall divided vertically into 15 equal parts, each with a different line, direction, and color, and all combinations, consisted of instructions for creating a wall drawing rather than creating the drawings themselves. Much in the same way, some performance art and other socially engaged works control, thereby leaving the outcomes to chance based on the active participation of the viewer. Moves the conversation beyond an emphasis on the mastery of materials and techniques to a dialogue on ideas and artistic practices that are not contingent upon form or function. Similar ideas and practices were manifest in the works of Fluxus and performance artists, as well as film and video and social sculpture as artists explored new media. Yet Marcel Duchamp is often credited with the first conceptual artwork. Duchamp's fountain, created in 1917, stands as one of the most influential artworks during. The significance of this work lies in the fact that Duchamp, quite intentionally, openly changing conventions of the art world. Duchamp's intent was to shift the focus of the work from physical craft to that of intellectual interpretation. As the ready-made, fountain was not created by the artist's hands. Rather, the urinal had been mass-produced in a factory. What Duchamp accomplished, according to art critic Philip Henschler, was to forever sever the traditional link between the artist's labor and the merit of the work. While arguably the fountain could still be critiqued on a more formal basis, Duchamp's choice of the urinal was intended to present a familiar object that was inherently grotesque as to challenge the existing notions of aesthetic beauty. And by selecting an object that existed not by the artist's hands, Duchamp was successful, as LeWitt described, in emphasizing the concept behind the work rather than the skills and the techniques in making the object. How does this translate to the teaching of art? With such conceptual works, the viewer is often struck by such questions as, why is that art? Or what does that mean? Clearly removed from considerations of how it was made. This conceptual turn leads the artist, and thus the educator, down the path focusing more on why we make art. Yet this often lies in distinct contrast. Admittedly, in my own artistic development, I experienced this turn at a point when mastery of craft and technique became more instinctual, which allowed me to focus more on expressing ideas or utilizing whatever materials were most appropriate. Perhaps ironically, this often led me to work with materials, techniques, and artistic practices I had never used before. I shared this example from my own artistic development as a means to emphasize the significance of my formal training as an artist. But for me, it served as a point of departure rather than as a means to an end. Consequently, my role as an artist shifted dramatically from that of being a skilled worker, focusing upon the role that the audience played in creating or completing a work of art. Yet considering teaching as a conceptual art practice extends beyond presenting increasingly diverse conceptions of practice. It becomes just as much about challenging one's attitudes and beliefs, and particularly the conventions that shape them. My own attitudes and perceptions about art and education changed as I became more involved in community arts and service learning, socially engaged art, activism, and art for social justice. as they provided a focus for my emerging understanding of the intertwining aesthetic and social implications of arts practice. The shift in emphasis draws attention to what a work does and focuses on the beliefs it embodies, the social roles it assumes, and its interactions with the audience. As a result of de-emphasizing the object and the outcome, teaching art as conceptual practice becomes more about the thoughts it provokes, the ideas that are challenged, the relationships it engenders, and the disruption of the status quo. Such a philosophy suggests a new visual language through gestures that both form and inform. This involves not just providing new content, but new contexts as well. It involves, both literally and figuratively, pushing the boundaries of what constitutes art and where learning happens. Consequently, learning experiences can be created for students so that they experience arts education not only as the creating of art, but on the generation of ideas that create a deeper understanding of themselves, a broader perspective of others, a greater awareness of social issues, and seeing their potential to make change. Excuse me. This requires the artist and the teacher, and thus the student, to actively engage with the outside world. This new terrain of consciousness refers to the intent of the artist shifting beyond a narrow focus on creative self-expression or conforming to the aesthetic demands of the marketplace, to emphasize the greater needs of others within a social context that gives such art its meaning beyond traditional aesthetics. As a conceptual practice, teaching art becomes a way to make meaning or to become more engaged with the community. It requires that we engage more deeply with the process and less about where the process leads us, while distancing oneself from more traditional and historical paradigms. The process revolves around solving problems and engaging with the work conceptually as well as technically. One of the things I love most about teaching art is that I can give all of my students the same problem to solve, and yet they'll all come up with unique answers. The ways in which teaching as a conceptual art practice is realized in the classroom is through the incorporation of contemporary theories and practices that advocate the integration of broader perspectives such as contemporary art, multiculturalism, visual culture, and socially engaged art in education. During a semester-long field experience working with inner-city school children in conjunction with an after-school program, I had students develop lessons and activities that focus more on collaboration and community engagement. This was a challenge at first, as many of them come from more traditional fine arts backgrounds. As one of my students reflected, so long, I found myself searching for meaningful reasons to become a teacher beyond instructing students how to create works of art. I found it more important and helpful to begin answering questions of why I wanted to teach art before thinking about how I might teach it. This reflection reveals the personal and the pedagogical beliefs, assumptions, and theoretical knowledge that indicate a reconsideration of the roles of both the artist and the teacher. Such a philosophy embraces an active public dimension as well as an intellectual one. This captures what I believe are the essential qualities of conceptual art and teaching while addressing the complex, multifaceted, and situated nature of knowledge. This essay provides an overview of alternative discourses in art and education generated from within the field. What has emerged is a framework for careful reconsideration of the practices of the artist and the teacher, one that articulates a sense of conceptual art as a teaching practice. The ideas between conceptual art and teaching are not autonomous and separate, but rather appropriate rework and often subvert other through a series of unique stylizations. Conceptual art as a teaching practice, I believe, is uniquely suited for this encounter, and that it creates multiple perspectives and reference points from which to make meaning of our experiences. Artists and teachers, much like Duchamp, we should continue to challenge the conventions that constrain artistic practice rather than limit the conceptions of what is possible. Thank you.